Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the man who has conquered the wrestling ring, dominated Hollywood, and inspired millions with his muscle and charisma, finds himself staring into the unknown. But this time, it's not a movie set or a wrestling match. It's outer space. NASA has hand-picked him to lead a mission to Mars, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. One that will cement his legacy as not just a global star, but a hero for humanity. Dwayne Johnson had faced many challenges in his life, but nothing could have prepared him for the surreal reality of space. Standing in the cramped confines of NASA's training center, with a spacesuit that barely fit over his broad shoulders, he felt an unfamiliar sense of unease. He was used to dominating arenas, controlling movie sets, and inspiring millions. But this was different. "You're going to Mars," the official had told him, a sparkle of pride in their eyes. "You're the face of the mission, the one who will inspire the world." Dwayne had smiled. He was used to inspiring people. Hell, that was practically his brand. But now, staring at the other astronauts in the training room, a new feeling crept in: fear. They weren't like him. They weren't movie stars. They weren't used to the spotlight, the cameras, the scrutiny. And for the first time in his career, Dwayne felt the harsh sting of alienation. These were trained professionals. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was here to serve as a symbol, a marketing tool for NASA's push to make space exploration more accessible, more mainstream. But to these astronauts, he wasn't an equal. He was an outsider. As the training sessions wore on, the other astronauts made it clear they resented his presence. They were experts. He was just a celebrity with muscles. The sneers, the passive-aggressive comments, the subtle jabs at his lack of technical knowledge, they were constant. "Think you're ready for this, Rock?" asked Serena, a veteran pilot who had been to space twice before. Her tone was loaded with sarcasm, and it made Dwayne's blood boil. "You think some catchphrases and a smile will get you through space?" Dwayne bit back the words that threatened to spill out. He was used to criticism. He was used to having people doubt him. But this felt different. This wasn't some random internet troll or a journalist trying to bait him for clicks. These were his teammates. The people he was supposed to trust with his life in a spacecraft that would be hurtling through the vacuum of space at unimaginable speeds. "Just don't get in my way," Serena added, her words venomous as she walked away. The next day, the sabotage began. It started with small things, equipment failure, the slightest glitches in the training simulators, but Dwayne began to notice something off. Every time he tried to get involved with the technical aspects, something would malfunction. Every time he tried to speak up, he was dismissed with a curt response or a cold stare. It wasn't until the third day that Dwayne realized the extent of the problem. He'd been tasked with testing the spacecraft's communication system, an essential component for the Mars mission. When he connected the system to his helmet, expecting a simple readout, the equipment sparked and shorted out. Smoke filled the small cabin, and alarms blared. Panic spread like wildfire. But what was more terrifying than the malfunction was the suspicion growing in the crew's eyes. Someone had deliberately tampered with the equipment. And the only possible suspect was one of them. That night, Dwayne confronted the crew in the mess hall. His muscles tensed, and the confidence that had made him a superstar in Hollywood filled his body again. He didn't care if they saw him as a joke. He wasn't here to play games. He was here to save lives. "I'm not going down without a fight," he said, looking each astronaut in the eye. "One of you is sabotaging the mission. And I'm not letting it happen." The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air. "Sabotage?" Serena scoffed. "That's rich coming from you. You're the one who's not cut out for this mission, not the rest of us." Dwayne didn't flinch. "Cut the crap, Serena. The equipment didn't malfunction by accident. Someone's messing with us. And it's not gonna stop until we figure out who's behind it." The other astronauts exchanged glances, their faces filled with uncertainty, and then something clicked in Dwayne's mind. One of them was in on this. One of them had a personal vendetta against him. But who? The next morning, Dwayne had a conversation with Dr. Daniel Park, the mission's lead scientist. Dr. Park was a calm, collected man, who had been nothing but polite to Dwayne during the training sessions. But today, there was something different in his eyes. Something distant. "I know you're having a hard time with this," Dr. Park said quietly, his voice low. "You're not cut out for this, Dwayne. Not really. You're not a scientist. You don't belong here." Dwayne's stomach churned, and a deep frustration built inside him. This wasn't just a case of simple sabotage. This was personal. Someone didn't just want him to fail, they wanted him to quit. "Who is it, Daniel?" Dwayne asked, his voice low, dangerous. "Who's behind this?" Dr. Park didn't answer. Instead, he gave Dwayne a cold smile. "You'll figure it out, Rock. You always do. But the truth might be too much for you to handle." And that's when it hit him. The sabotage wasn't just about proving he wasn't capable of being an astronaut. It was about undermining him at every turn. And the more Dwayne thought about it, the more it clicked. The sabotage had started right after his first day in space training. Who had been the most vocal about his presence? Who had the most to gain from his failure? Serena. She was his most vocal critic. But there was more. Someone had planted seeds of doubt in the crew's minds. Someone who had known the crew's weaknesses. Someone with power. Someone who could manipulate them all. And that someone was Dr. Park. As Dwayne pieced it together, he realized that the sabotage wasn't random. It was calculated. And it was designed to destroy him. To make him question his worth. To make the world see him as a failure. But Dwayne wasn't just going to let that happen. Dwayne Johnson had faced countless challenges throughout his life, but none were as perplexing, as maddening, or as isolating as what he was enduring now. He had entered this mission to Mars with the belief that his leadership, physical strength, and charisma would be enough to carry him through the rigorous training and the pressure of being the face of the mission. But this wasn't just about performing under pressure, it was about survival. And someone, somewhere in this crew, wanted him to fail. As he sat in the quiet observation room of the spacecraft, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. The sabotage was becoming more deliberate. The malfunctioning equipment wasn't just a technical issue anymore, it was a coordinated effort to tear apart the team, to break Dwayne down and force him to quit. He had confronted Dr. Daniel Park the night before, demanding answers, but the scientist had only given him cryptic warnings. "The truth might be too much for you to handle," he'd said, almost taunting him. It was as if Park was playing some game, and Dwayne was the unwitting pawn. Dwayne stood up, his muscles stiff from sitting too long. He walked over to the small window, staring out at the expanse of space, the endless void, silent and imposing. It was supposed to be awe-inspiring, but all he felt was a deep, unsettling quiet, like something was lurking just outside the walls of the spacecraft, waiting to pounce. Suddenly, the door to the observation room opened. Serena walked in, her eyes cool, her expression unreadable. She was one of the few who hadn't outright mocked him, but she also hadn't been particularly friendly. Still, Dwayne sensed there was more beneath the surface. She was a veteran astronaut, strong, resilient, but there was something about her attitude that made him uneasy. She was always watching him, always waiting for him to slip up. "Are you okay?" Serena asked, her voice devoid of warmth. "You're looking a little off." Dwayne turned to face her, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. "I'm fine. Just tired of dealing with people who don't know what the hell they're doing." Serena's eyes flickered briefly, and Dwayne knew he'd hit a nerve. She didn't like being challenged. But this was no longer about pride. This was about survival. "Yeah, I get it," she replied, taking a step closer. "You're not used to being the one who's out of place. You're the Rock. You're the guy who's used to being the biggest and the best. But you're not the only one here with something to prove." Dwayne narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Serena's gaze darkened, and for a moment, Dwayne thought he saw something break in her. A crack in the armor. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual cold composure. "I mean, you're not the only one who has something to prove. We all have our reasons for being here. You're not the only one who feels like they have to prove they belong." Dwayne didn't understand. Why was she being so defensive? Why couldn't she just let him in? "Look," Serena continued, her voice softer now, but still edged with something cold, "I get it. You're used to being the center of attention. But this isn't about you. It's about the mission. And you," she paused, looking at him with a mixture of pity and irritation, "you need to understand that. Dwayne felt the words land like a slap. He had never been one to back down, especially when it came to his worth. He knew he had earned his place here, even if it was through unconventional means. And yet, every time he thought he'd made progress, he felt the walls close in. Serena was right about one thing. This wasn't about fame or popularity. This was about survival. But he wasn't sure if the people around him saw it that way. "I didn't come here for fame, Serena," Dwayne said quietly, his voice firm, his words cutting through the tension between them. "I came here to prove that I'm more than just a wrestler or an actor. I came here because I believe in this mission. I believe in space exploration." Serena's expression softened for the briefest moment, but before she could respond, the alarm blared through the ship. A deep, mechanical sound that made the hairs on Dwayne's neck stand up. He froze. "What's that?" Dwayne asked, his pulse spiking. "Stay here," Serena said, her voice suddenly sharp. She didn't wait for him to answer before turning and storming out of the room. Dwayne hesitated, but curiosity got the best of him. His mind raced. Was it another malfunction? Or was something else going wrong? The sabotage had only gotten worse, and now he could feel it in the air. Something was about to happen. He followed Serena down the narrow hall to the cockpit, where the crew was scrambling, shouting commands at each other. Dwayne's heart raced as he walked into the control room. "What's going on?" he demanded. "We've lost communication with Earth," Jason Carter, one of the more experienced astronauts, called out. "The communication relay just shut down. We're off the grid." The words hit Dwayne like a punch to the gut. They were in space. They couldn't afford to be cut off from Earth. The implications were terrifying. And then, as if to reinforce the worst-case scenario, the ship shuddered, the lights flickering briefly before stabilizing. "That wasn't just a glitch," Jason muttered, glancing at Dwayne with a hardened look in his eyes. "We've been tampered with." Dwayne's blood ran cold. The realization hit him harder than he anticipated. Someone on this ship, someone in the crew, was actively working against them. This was no longer just sabotage. It was deliberate. "You think someone in here is working against us?" Dwayne asked, his voice low, looking between Serena, Jason, and the others. The room went silent. "I don't think." "I know," Serena said, her eyes narrowing. "We're being targeted, Rock. Someone doesn't want us to succeed." Dwayne's mind raced back to the sabotage on the first day of training, the hidden malfunctions, the unexplained glitches. It all pointed to one thing: betrayal. The question was, who? Serena stepped closer to him, her voice a whisper but intense. "We need to figure out who's behind this. Before it's too late." Just then, Dr. Park walked into the room. He looked strangely composed for someone who had been dealing with critical systems failure just minutes before. "You think it's one of us, don't you?" Park said, his voice carrying a chill. Jason and Serena exchanged a look, one that Dwayne couldn't interpret. They had their suspicions, and now, Dwayne was part of their plan. "We can't keep pretending everything's fine," Jason said, his voice rough. "Something's off. We need to find out who's behind this, before it's too late." Dwayne stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who's behind this, Park?" Park's gaze met his for the first time, an almost imperceptible flicker of guilt in his eyes. But before Dwayne could react, Park straightened up and said, "You need to focus on the mission, Rock. And stop making assumptions." But Dwayne had already made up his mind. It wasn't just a malfunction. The sabotage was personal, and the culprit was one of them. The question was not who, it was why. The days that followed the initial sabotage were a blur of uncertainty and mounting tension. Dwayne Johnson stood on the edge of the spacecraft, the vastness of space stretching out before him, an endless void that made every problem on board feel smaller, and yet infinitely more threatening. The crew had begun to fracture. The whispers had grown louder. There was someone in their midst, someone who was determined to see this mission fail. Dwayne was no longer sure whom he could trust. The malfunctioning communication systems were only the tip of the iceberg. The sabotage had escalated. Malfunctioning thrusters, cracked solar panels, even the life support system had been tampered with. Each glitch was more serious than the last. The crew was no longer operating like a team. It was as though everyone was on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Jason Carter, once an ally, had become distant. He was an experienced astronaut, but there was something in his eyes that didn't sit right. Was he hiding something? Or was he just as frustrated as Dwayne? Serena, too, had turned colder. Every glance she gave Dwayne seemed tinged with suspicion. She was smart, sharp, and increasingly paranoid about every small detail of the mission. She had begun questioning Dwayne's every move, every decision he made. But it wasn't just them. It was the whole crew. They had become a ticking time bomb, and Dwayne could feel the pressure building, the tension hanging in the air. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken distrust, each crew member eyeing the other, silently accusing one another of being the traitor. And in the center of it all, Dwayne was becoming the focal point, the celebrity who was distracting the mission, the outsider who didn't belong. As the days wore on, Dwayne decided he couldn't wait any longer. The truth had to come out. The sabotage had gone too far, and it was clear now. If they didn't uncover the saboteurs soon, the mission, and all their lives, would be at risk. Dwayne waited until the late hours of the evening, when the crew had gone to sleep, and then he slipped quietly into the control room. It was time to take matters into his own hands. He approached the communication panel first. He knew the system had been tampered with, but what he didn't know was why. The sabotage wasn't random, it was targeted. He ran a diagnostic check, and that's when he found it: hidden files. Someone had tried to overwrite the ship's backup systems, specifically the communications encryption, to prevent any calls for help from Earth. The files were dated, and as Dwayne dug deeper, he realized the saboteur had been planning this for a while. He reached for his earpiece, calling for Jason. "Carter, meet me in the control room. We need to talk." Moments later, Jason appeared, his eyes still distant but focused as he stepped inside. "You found something, didn't you?" Jason's voice was guarded, his posture tense. Dwayne nodded. "I think we're being sabotaged, and I think I know who's doing it." Jason's eyes flickered with an unreadable expression. "Who?" "It's you," Dwayne said quietly, his voice low but firm. Jason froze, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the accusation hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. "You're saying I'm the one behind the sabotage?" Jason finally asked, his voice tinged with anger, though Dwayne could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You tell me," Dwayne shot back, stepping closer. "I found files, Carter, hidden files. Someone's been trying to disable the communication system. It's deliberate. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. We've all been picking up on it. I'm just the first to connect the dots." Jason's face paled slightly, but he didn't back down. "You think I'm sabotaging the mission? You think I want to put us all at risk?" He scoffed. "I've been to space more times than I can count, Johnson. I wouldn't jeopardize it." But Dwayne wasn't buying it. "You're hiding something. You've been distant, cold. I've been in the game long enough to know when someone's lying." Jason stepped back, his jaw clenched as he turned away from Dwayne. "You don't know anything about me, Rock. You don't know anything about what this mission means." Dwayne's anger flared. "Don't play games with me, Carter. This isn't about your ego or your career. We're talking about lives here. We're talking about Mars. And if you don't come clean, we're all going to die." Jason's face tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. For a long moment, he said nothing. But then, his shoulders slumped, and Dwayne saw it, the crack in his armor. "I didn't want this," Jason said quietly, his voice shaking. "I never wanted any of this. But it's bigger than you think. Bigger than me. Bigger than all of us. There are people back on Earth who don't want this mission to succeed. They didn't think we could do it, and they wanted to make sure we didn't." Dwayne's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Jason looked up at him, his eyes full of regret. "I was recruited. But not for my skills as an astronaut. They needed someone to sabotage this mission, to make sure it failed. And I was given a choice: help destroy the mission, or have my past exposed. I didn't have a choice, Dwayne. They threatened everything I've worked for." The words hit Dwayne like a punch to the gut. Someone on Earth had orchestrated the sabotage. This wasn't just a grudge against him, It was a carefully calculated move to destroy the entire mission. Dwayne's mind raced, but before he could process it all, Jason continued. I didn't want to do it. But I had to. I thought if I slowed you down, if I messed things up just enough, I could buy some time to figure out how to stop it. But I couldn't. Dwayne stood motionless, his thoughts spinning. This was bigger than he had imagined. Jason hadn't been working alone. Someone on Earth had orchestrated all of this, pulling the strings from a distance, making sure that the mission failed. It wasn't about his pride. It wasn't about his celebrity status. This was a calculated move to take down the entire mission, and with it, Dwayne. I'm sorry, Jason said, his voice cracking. But I'm not the real enemy. They are. Dwayne's mind was racing as he realized the full scope of the conspiracy. He had trusted the people around him, and now they were all tangled in a web of lies. But Jason's confession didn't change one thing. Someone had betrayed them all. And Dwayne was going to find out who. Dwayne Johnson's heart pounded in his chest as he sat in the control room, the voice of Dr. Daniel Park still echoing in his mind. The mission was never about space exploration. It's about controlling you. The words seemed to hang in the air, suffocating him. Dwayne had suspected for a while that there was more to this mission than NASA had led him to believe, but this was a betrayal of a scale he hadn't prepared for. And the reality of it hit him harder than any opponent he'd ever faced in the ring. Dr. Park, the one person who had seemed to support him during the grueling training sessions, was the mastermind behind the sabotage. The man he had trusted was now the enemy. But Dwayne knew that this wasn't just about Dr. Park. It was bigger. Much bigger. The crew's faces were tense as they gathered in the control room, their distrust palpable. Jason, once a confidant, was looking at Dwayne like a stranger. Serena, who had been distant, was now eyeing him warily, though there was a hint of understanding in her gaze. What now? Serena asked, breaking the silence that had descended upon them. Dwayne's mind raced. They were in uncharted territory. Dr. Park had set this all in motion, but what was his endgame? Why go to such lengths to sabotage a mission that could change the course of history? And why drag Dwayne into it? We need to figure out what Park's endgame is, Dwayne said, his voice low and steady. We can't afford to sit around and wait for him to finish what he started. He's already turned this mission into a ticking time bomb. We need to stop him before he gets any further. Jason took a step forward, his face grim. But how? He has control of everything. The communications, the life support, he's been playing us from the start. Dwayne nodded. I know. But he can't control everything. He may have sabotaged the ship, but he doesn't control us. We still have time. We still have our minds, our skills. And most importantly, we have each other. Serena looked at Dwayne, her eyes softening slightly. We can't let him win. But we need to trust each other, Dwayne. All of us. No more secrets. No more lies. Dwayne met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. This mission, this crew, they were all in this together now. There was no room for distrust. If they were going to survive, they had to unite against a common enemy. And that enemy was Dr. Park. The hours that followed were a blur of planning and action. Dwayne led the team through each step carefully, working to secure the ship's critical systems while keeping an eye on Dr. Park's every move. The sabotage was escalating. The ship was now on a timer, with life support systems showing signs of critical failure. They had to act fast, but the uncertainty of who could be trusted made every decision a risk. As they moved through the darkened corridors of the spacecraft, Dwayne couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Park was always one step ahead. There was a cold calculation in his every move. He knew how to manipulate people, how to turn them against each other, and it seemed like he was always waiting for Dwayne to slip up. In the ship's maintenance bay, Dwayne, Serena, and Jason began to work on isolating the problem with the oxygen system. They were racing against the clock. Every minute wasted was a minute closer to the ship losing air supply entirely. Got it, Jason said, his hands shaking as he twisted a valve open. I've rerouted the oxygen to the lower chambers. It won't last long, but it'll buy us some time. Serena glanced at the readout, her brow furrowing. We don't have much time. If we don't shut down Park's access to the command center, we won't be able to control the ship systems at all. He'll have full control. Dwayne nodded. We'll split up. Jason, you keep working on the life support systems. Serena and I will go to the command center. We're getting that sabotage out of our hands. But as they turned to leave the maintenance bay, a sharp sound echoed through the corridor, followed by the unmistakable voice of Dr. Park over the intercom. You're wasting your time, Rock. Park's voice was smooth, almost mocking. There's nothing you can do to stop this. You should have just let me handle this quietly. But now, you're all in too deep. Dwayne's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. We'll see about that, Park, he said, his voice cold and determined. You don't control this mission. Not anymore. As Dwayne and Serena made their way to the command center, the ship seemed to close in around them. Every sound, every creak of the metal hull felt amplified, as if the ship itself was conspiring against them. The sabotage wasn't just technical now, it was psychological. Dr. Park had made them question each other. He had planted seeds of doubt, and now they had to fight not just for survival, but for their own trust in one another. The moment they reached the command center, the door slid open, and Dwayne stepped inside first, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of Park. The consoles were dim, the lights flickering as if the ship itself was fighting to stay alive. Serena stepped beside him, and together they began the task of restoring control to the ship. But as they worked, the reality of the situation hit Dwayne hard. They weren't just fighting Dr. Park. They were fighting against their own doubts, their own fears. The mission was spiraling out of control, and every decision felt like a gamble. Do you think we can fix this? Serena asked, her voice low as she worked alongside Dwayne. Dwayne hesitated for a moment before responding. We don't have a choice. We have to fix this. We're the only ones who can. As Dwayne continued to work on restoring the communication system, a sudden noise behind him made him turn sharply. Dr. Park stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of frustration and cold determination. You really think you can win, Rock? Park sneered, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and something darker. You're out of your depth. You always were. This mission was never about space. It was about power. And he stopped, his lips curling into a smile, I was always meant to be in charge. Dwayne stood tall, stepping forward until he was face to face with Park. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the standoff. You're wrong, Dwayne said, his voice unwavering. This mission was never about power. It was about discovery. About pushing humanity to new frontiers. And I'm not going to let you destroy that. Park's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing in a dangerous glare. You have no idea what you're up against. I do, Dwayne shot back. And I'm not backing down. With a swift movement, Dwayne lunged at the console and flipped a switch, initiating a security lockdown that sealed the command center off from the rest of the ship. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed through the room, and for a brief moment, the control room was silent. I think it's over, Park, Dwayne said quietly, his eyes fixed on the man who had been the source of all the chaos. Park's face contorted with fury, but he said nothing. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, holding it up to Dwayne's face. This is just the beginning, Park warned, his voice trembling with anger. You think you've won? No. This ship was never just about exploration. It was a weapon. Dwayne Johnson stood in the heart of the command center, his hand steady on the console, but inside, his mind was racing. Dr. Park's confession had sent shockwaves through the team. This mission to Mars, which they had all thought was about the future of humanity, was revealed to be a carefully crafted facade, an operation designed not for exploration, but for power, control, and manipulation. Dwayne had walked into a trap, and now, the stakes had shifted from space travel to survival. He turned to face the crew, who were standing just behind him, eyes wide with shock and fear. Jason, Serena, and the others had barely processed the enormity of what they were up against. We can't let him win, Dwayne said, his voice firm, cutting through the uncertainty. We have to take control of this ship, and we have to do it now. Jason stepped forward, his face pale but determined. How? We've been locked out of the command systems. Park's got full access to everything. If we try to override his control, we'll do it manually, Dwayne interrupted. We don't need to rely on the systems Park controls. We've got the skills and the power. If he thinks he can sabotage us, we'll show him what happens when you underestimate the strength of this crew." Serena's eyes flashed with anger. "He's been playing us like puppets. I knew something was off from the beginning. But I never imagined this." Dwayne's jaw tightened. "We all trusted him. But now, it's time to do what needs to be done. Let's expose his lies and take this mission back." They had no time to waste. The ship was rapidly approaching critical failure, and with Park's sabotage still in play, the crew was running on borrowed time. Dwayne moved quickly, barking orders as the team scrambled to initiate manual overrides on the ship's backup systems. But as they began working, a new wave of panic set in. Park had outplayed them. He had locked them out of everything, from communications to life support, and now, the sabotage had triggered another emergency, one that could very well destroy the mission for good. In the darkened control room, Dwayne and his team worked tirelessly, trying to restore the systems and regain control of the ship. The gravity of the situation was starting to sink in. Every action, every decision, now carried the weight of the mission, of humanity's future in space. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. "I'm not sure how much longer we have," Serena said, her voice tight with frustration. "The oxygen levels are dropping. If we don't fix this, we'll suffocate before we even reach Mars." Jason cursed under his breath as he frantically typed in commands, trying to get the life support system back online. This isn't just about the ship anymore. Park's sabotaged everything. He's tampered with the core systems. Anything we try to fix, he's already disabled. If we don't get help from Earth... Dwayne slammed his fist down on the console, frustration coursing through him. "We don't need Earth's help. We need to finish what we started. We need to take control of this ship before it's too late." The tension in the room was unbearable, but Dwayne kept his focus. He had one goal, to stop Dr. Park and save the crew. He turned to Jason. "Is there a way to bypass the lock on the command center? Anything we can use to override Park's control?" Jason paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He looked up, his eyes heavy with doubt. "There's a way, but it's risky. We'll have to rewire the backup system manually, and even then, we're not guaranteed that we'll regain full control. Park's encrypted everything. But there's one system that hasn't been touched, the external propulsion control. If we take over that, we can reset the ship's trajectory and override the rest." Dwayne's eyes narrowed, determination setting in. "Then that's what we'll do. We get control of propulsion, and we'll force Park's hand. He won't be able to keep playing us." The crew moved with military precision as they made their way to the external propulsion control room. The narrow hallways felt even tighter now, the fear and tension palpable in the air. Dwayne could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. The mission was no longer about space exploration, it was about survival. And as they reached the propulsion control room, the feeling of urgency grew. Dwayne slammed his fist against the door control, and the heavy door slid open with a hiss. The room was bathed in cold, sterile light, the external control panels flashing with error messages and warnings. The room was a tangle of wires, blinking screens, and machinery that Dwayne had never been trained to operate. But he didn't need to know how it worked. He just needed to get it back online. Jason took the lead, pulling open a panel and exposing a series of tangled wires. "This is it. If we bypass this system, we can reset everything. But if we screw it up..." "We won't screw it up," Dwayne said, his voice low and determined. "Let's do this." Serena stepped up beside him, looking at the control panel. "I'll handle the external systems. You focus on the propulsion." Dwayne nodded. He trusted her completely. Together, they worked in silence, each of them focused on the task at hand. Time was slipping away. Each minute they wasted was a minute closer to being locked out of the ship systems permanently. Jason continued to rewire the propulsion systems, his face set in a mask of concentration. Almost there. Just a few more seconds. Then, the lights flickered, and the ship groaned as if in protest. A loud clang echoed through the room, and the systems flickered before going dark. The control panels went completely blank, and the room was plunged into a terrifying silence. Dwayne's heart raced. What happened? Jason looked up, panic flashing in his eyes. We lost power. All systems are offline. This isn't just Park messing with us. Someone's pulling the strings. Someone on Earth knows exactly what we're doing. A sudden, cold realization hit Dwayne. The sabotage wasn't just about Dr. Park, it was a coordinated attack. A larger conspiracy had infiltrated the mission from the start, and Dr. Park had been their puppet. But who was the true mastermind? Before he could voice his thoughts, the door to the propulsion room slammed open, and Dr. Park stood in the doorway, his face twisted with anger and desperation. "I warned you," Park said, his voice seething with rage. "I warned you that you would never succeed. But now, you've gone too far. I'm the one in control, Rock. Not you. You're nothing but a pawn." Dwayne stepped forward, his body tense, his fists clenched. "You're not in control anymore, Park. This ship, this mission, none of it belongs to you. And neither do the people you've been manipulating." Park's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but the cold smile returned. "You think you've won? You haven't even seen the full picture yet. You've played right into my hands." Dwayne's blood ran cold. What's he talking about? As if answering his question, Park stepped aside to reveal a small control panel at the back of the room, one Dwayne hadn't seen before. "It's too late. Even if you fix the propulsion, even if you regain control, you'll never reach Mars. Not now. Not after I've activated the failsafes." The words hit Dwayne like a punch to the gut. They were running out of time. If Park had set up failsafes, they were all trapped, on a one-way trip into nothing. Dwayne Johnson's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts as he stood in the propulsion room, facing Dr. Park, the man who had orchestrated the sabotage of the mission to Mars. The weight of Park's words hung in the air, thick with impending doom. "You'll never reach Mars. Not now. Not after I've activated the failsafes." The room around them seemed to close in, the low hum of the ship's malfunctioning systems reverberating in his ears. Every second felt like an eternity, each one stretching the tension tighter and tighter until it threatened to snap. "Park," Dwayne said, his voice low but laced with authority, "you're making a mistake. You think this is over, but it's not. We're not going down without a fight. And neither is this mission." Park's cold smile only deepened. "Fight all you want. The failsafes are already triggered. You can fix the systems, you can override everything in your power, but it won't matter. The countdown is already set." The realization hit Dwayne like a cold slap to the face. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were racing against a ticking clock. Park had prepared for everything. Their failure, their resistance, and their eventual desperation. And now, with the ship systems malfunctioning and the failsafes in place, there was no clear way out. "Why?" Dwayne asked, his fists clenched. "Why go this far? Why sabotage us, sabotage the mission?" Dr. Park's eyes narrowed, his lips curling in disdain. "Because some people can't be allowed to win, Rock. This mission was never about space exploration. It was about control. Power. The world was ready to see you as a hero, a symbol. But I had to make sure that symbol didn't stand for what they wanted. I had to ensure the mission failed, and that you failed with it." As the weight of Park's words hit Dwayne, he couldn't shake the anger rising within him. He had been used as a pawn, just like the rest of the crew. And now, everything they had worked for, everything they had endured, was hanging by a thread. "We're not giving up," Dwayne said, his voice firm, determination pulsing through him. "You can sabotage the systems, you can try to break us, but we're still fighting. We're still going to Mars. If you think you can stop us, you're wrong." Park's expression hardened, and for the first time, Dwayne saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You really think you can stop this? You think you're more than just a pawn in this game? You've never been in control, Rock. You've always been part of the plan." Dwayne's muscles tensed as adrenaline surged through him. He wasn't just going to let Park have the final say. He wasn't just going to sit back and let his team fall apart. They had come too far. "We're not giving up. Not now, not ever." Jason, who had been silent in the background, stepped forward. "He's right. We're not stopping. We'll find a way around your failsafes. We'll fix this ship and finish this mission. And if you try to stop us, we'll take you down." Jason's voice was laced with quiet resolve, and Dwayne could see the shift in the crew. They were no longer just passengers on this mission. They were fighters, united in the face of the conspiracy that had nearly torn them apart. Park took a deep breath, his expression unreadable. "Fine," he said, stepping back slightly. "You think you can outsmart me? You think you can beat me at my own game? Try." With that, Park turned and walked toward the back of the propulsion room, his figure disappearing into the shadows. For a moment, Dwayne and the crew stood in silence. But then, the reality of the situation hit them. The sabotage wasn't just about the ship. It was about the power that lay beneath the surface, the control that had been wielded over them from the very beginning. "Let's go," Dwayne said, his voice breaking the stillness. "We don't have time to waste." The crew scrambled into action, each of them moving quickly but deliberately, determined to restore the ship systems and regain control. Dwayne knew they were running out of time. The fail-safes Park had activated weren't just in place to stop the mission. They were designed to ensure that the crew wouldn't survive to tell the truth. The team split up, each person working on a different part of the ship. Serena, with her technical expertise, focused on overriding the ship's communication system. Jason, despite his earlier doubts, threw himself into recalibrating the life support systems. And Dwayne, he was on the front lines, his mind working furiously as he tried to figure out how to stop the fail-safes from destroying everything they had worked for. The air was thick with tension, the pressure mounting as the seconds ticked by. The spacecraft hummed ominously, and Dwayne could feel the eyes of the crew on him, their trust and their hopes resting on his shoulders. "I've got the communication system back online." Serena's voice rang through the comms. "But we don't have much time. We need to disable the fail-safes, or this ship's going to go dark." "Keep at it," Dwayne shouted back, his voice full of resolve. He turned to Jason. "How are the life support systems?" "We've got a few minutes before things get critical," Jason replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We can't fix everything, but we can stabilize it for now. But it's only temporary." Dwayne nodded grimly. He knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. They were on borrowed time, and they had no choice but to push forward. As Dwayne worked alongside Jason and Serena, his mind raced with one question. Who was behind the scenes pulling the strings? The sabotage wasn't just about Park, it was about the bigger picture. Someone on Earth had orchestrated this, and now it was clear. They wanted to make sure that this mission would fail. They were using the crew as pawns in a game far bigger than any of them realized. A voice crackled over the comms. "Dwayne, this is Serena. I've accessed Park's personal logs. It looks like the sabotage was only the beginning. There's a whole network of people behind this. They were planning to hijack the mission, redirect it to a different objective. Mars was just a distraction." Dwayne's heart dropped as the realization hit him. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to take control of the mission from a shadowy organization that had been orchestrating events from the very start. They were caught in a conspiracy that reached far beyond the ship and into the corridors of power on Earth. "We need to expose them," Dwayne said, his voice thick with determination. "We need to stop this before they can use us for whatever they've planned." But even as he said the words, a cold shiver ran down his spine. They were up against forces far bigger than they'd ever imagined. Dwayne's mind was racing, but as he continued to work, a thought struck him. If they didn't stop the fail-safe soon, they would never make it to Mars. But if they succeeded, they would have a chance to expose the people behind this, no matter the cost. And then, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Park. His voice crackled through the ship's comms, and the calm tone of his words sent a chill down Dwayne's spine. "I hope you've enjoyed your little game, Rock," Park's voice echoed through the control room. "But the truth is, you're too late. You've played right into my hands. You'll never make it to Mars. This mission ends here." Dwayne clenched his fists, a fire igniting within him. "Not today, Park. Not today." The control room was a cacophony of flashing lights and high-pitched alarms. Dwayne Johnson's hands were covered in sweat as he gripped the console, his eyes scanning the systems, hoping to find a way to override the fail-safes Dr. Park had activated. The tension in the air was thick, every movement felt like a race against time. "You'll never make it to Mars. This mission ends here." Dr. Park's voice continued to echo through the comms, taunting them, making it clear that the sabotage wasn't just an isolated incident, it was part of a bigger plan. A plan that had been set into motion long before they ever launched into space. Dwayne's fists clenched. The mission wasn't just at risk, it was teetering on the edge of collapse. And the worst part was, they weren't fighting an external force. They were fighting someone within their own ranks, someone who had been planted there, working against them from the inside. "We have to expose him," Dwayne muttered under his breath. "We have to stop Park and whoever is behind this. And we need to do it now." Serena's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through Dwayne's thoughts. "I'm running out of time. The fail-safes are locked in place, and I can't access the systems without triggering more security measures. We need a way to bypass everything Park put in place." Jason, who had been working on restoring the life support systems, spoke up, his voice laced with frustration. "We don't have the luxury of more time. The systems are deteriorating faster than we can repair them. And if Park activated any kind of self-destruct mechanism..." Dwayne's heart sank as he realized the gravity of their situation. They were on a ticking clock. The sabotage had escalated, and now, Park was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost them everything. "We don't stop," Dwayne said, his voice hard with resolve. "We fix this. We finish this mission." Serena's voice was firm in reply. "But how, Rock? How do we beat someone who's already planned every move ahead of us? We're just a few people in a tin can floating through space. What can we really do?" Dwayne stood up straighter, looking at his team, his resolve hardening with every word Serena spoke. "We may be outnumbered, we may be outgunned, but that doesn't mean we don't fight back. We've come this far. We've trained for this. We're stronger than Park thinks. I'll lead the charge. You do your part, and we'll get through this together. Just like we always have." The crew exchanged glances, the unspoken bond of unity beginning to form once again. They weren't just a collection of individuals, they were a team. And Dwayne had no intention of letting Park tear them apart. Dwayne's first priority was the communication system. He knew if they couldn't communicate with Earth, they'd be cut off. No backup. No way to alert anyone to the danger they were facing. "Serena," Dwayne said, his voice sharp, "start on the backup comms. I'll work on the propulsion system to get the ship's trajectory back on course. If we can gain control of the ship's movement, we'll have more leverage." Serena didn't hesitate, moving to her station. "On it. I'll need your help though. We have to go through the manual overrides. Park's encryption won't let us access the backups without unlocking the primary control grid." Dwayne nodded. He didn't need to be told twice. He moved quickly, his mind focusing on the tasks at hand. They had no time to waste. Every second brought them closer to disaster, closer to the failure Park wanted to see. As Dwayne worked to access the propulsion system, a dark thought crept into his mind. Park had been thorough in his sabotage. He hadn't just crippled the ship systems. He'd manipulated the crew, planted seeds of distrust and doubt. The sabotage wasn't just technical, it was psychological. And now Dwayne realized something he hadn't seen before. The sabotage wasn't just about stopping them from reaching Mars, it was about breaking their will. Park was playing a game of manipulation, forcing Dwayne and his crew to doubt everything they knew about themselves and each other. Dwayne's mind flashed back to his first few days on the mission. The cold stares from the crew, the subtle dismissals, the mockery. He had brushed it off as part of the challenge, but now he understood. Park had been preparing them for failure from the very beginning. He had made them question their worth. And as the sabotage continued, it became clear, Park wasn't just trying to ruin the mission. He was trying to break Dwayne down, to destroy his confidence, to force him into submission. Dwayne wasn't having it. He glanced over at Jason, who was working furiously to stabilize the life support systems. "How's it going?" Jason didn't look up, but his voice was steady. "I've got the systems stable for now. But if Park has a backup plan, it'll trigger as soon as we try to reactivate propulsion. We can't afford to make another move without being prepared." Dwayne took a deep breath. They needed to take control, and they needed to do it quickly. But the question still nagged at him, who else was involved in this? Who was pulling the strings behind Park? The answer came sooner than he expected. The comms crackled to life, But this time, it wasn't Dr. Park's voice that came through. It was someone else, someone Dwayne hadn't expected. "Dwayne," the voice said, calm but tinged with a cold menace. "I see you've discovered the truth. You really think you can outsmart us? You really think you can defeat what's already been set in motion?" Dwayne froze, the blood draining from his face. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. "You," Dwayne rasped, his throat dry. "You're behind this." The voice chuckled, low and sinister. "I'm afraid so. You've been so busy chasing shadows, Dwayne. But I suppose it's only fitting. After all, you've been chasing fame your whole life. Now you're chasing power. But here's the thing you don't understand. Power is something you never truly control. It controls you." "Who the hell are you?" Dwayne demanded, his anger rising as he realized the full scope of what was happening. "What do you want from us?" The voice on the other end only smirked. "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is that you've outlived your usefulness. You see, Dwayne, this mission was never about you. It was never about the crew. It was about leveraging the future of humanity to secure a foothold for those of us who understand that space isn't just the final frontier, it's the next battleground." Dwayne's stomach twisted as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a corporate conspiracy, or even a political one. This was about control, control of space, control of the future. A shadow organization had infiltrated the mission from the beginning, planting the seeds for their takeover in the form of Dr. Park. But now it was clear, someone far more powerful had been pulling the strings. "I'm done playing your game," Dwayne growled. "If you think you can control us, you're wrong. You're not going to destroy this mission." The voice laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've already lost, Dwayne. You just don't know it yet." Before Dwayne could respond, the comms cut out, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. Dwayne turned to the crew, his mind racing. He now understood the full scope of what they were up against. They weren't just fighting Dr. Park. They were fighting a global conspiracy, a shadow organization with resources and influence that went far beyond anything they had ever imagined. But Dwayne wasn't going to back down. He had been through too much, survived too many battles to let this mission, and everything they had worked for, fall apart. "We don't stop," Dwayne said, his voice resolute. "We finish this mission. We get to Mars, and we expose whoever is behind this." Serena nodded, her face grim but determined. "We're with you, Rock." Jason stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Let's finish this." The cold silence of space stretched beyond the confines of the spacecraft, suffocating in its vastness. Inside the command center, the hum of the ship's compromised systems was the only sound, a constant reminder of the perilous situation Dwayne and his crew were in. Time was running out. They were in the final stages of a mission meant to redefine humanity's place in space. But now, the entire mission had become a race against not just time, but betrayal and conspiracy. Dwayne Johnson's fists clenched as the realization hit him full force. They weren't just fighting for control of the ship. They were fighting for their very lives. Every second that passed brought them closer to the final confrontation, not with Dr. Park, but with the shadowy organization pulling the strings from Earth. "Do you understand what we're up against?" Dwayne's voice was sharp as he addressed the crew. His gaze swept over the group, Serena, Jason, and the others who had now become his family in this hostile void. "We're fighting more than just sabotage. We're fighting a war, one that's been set in motion before we even knew we were part of it." Jason, his hands still working frantically at the control panel, nodded grimly. "I never thought I'd be caught in something like this. But this is more than just a mission gone wrong. Whoever's behind this has been orchestrating things from the very beginning. And we've been walking right into their trap." Serena, her face taut with frustration, leaned over a terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I found something. A pattern in the sabotage. The tampering with the propulsion systems, the communications failures, it's all been staged to lead us here. To make us think we're dealing with just technical issues. But we're not. We've been manipulated. And it's not just about stopping us from reaching Mars, it's about using us as pawns in a much larger game." Dwayne stepped closer to her, his expression hardening with determination. "So we're not just dealing with Park. We're up against a shadow network. Someone with more power than we could have ever imagined. Serena nodded, her brow furrowing in concentration. This goes beyond space exploration. This is about control, about using the mission as a means of manipulating public perception, gaining influence, and securing political and corporate power. The weight of her words hung heavy in the room, each crew member processing the magnitude of what they were facing. This wasn't just a space mission anymore. It was a fight for survival, against an enemy they couldn't see, but one that had orchestrated their every move. Dwayne clenched his jaw. He could feel the pressure mounting. They were running out of time, and Park wasn't the only one who wanted them to fail. The conspiracy ran deeper. The sabotage was only a small part of a much bigger plan. "We stop them now," Dwayne said, his voice low but filled with unshakable resolve. "We finish this mission. We expose the truth. And we get to Mars." But there was one thing left to do before they could even think about taking control of the mission. They had to stop the failsafes. Park had triggered them, and without neutralizing them, they'd never have a chance to regain control. The crew worked as a well-oiled machine, each of them playing their part. Dwayne moved between terminals, guiding and assisting, offering his strength and leadership when needed, but also listening and trusting in the skills of his team. They weren't just astronauts now. They were soldiers in a battle against an invisible enemy. Jason had made significant progress with the life support systems, stabilizing them enough to buy them some breathing room. Serena was doing her best to bypass Park's encryption, but the deeper they dug, the more they realized just how far ahead he had planned. The sabotage wasn't random. It was carefully orchestrated to hit them at their most vulnerable points. Minutes felt like hours. But the crew wasn't giving up. They couldn't afford to. Then, the voice they all dreaded came through the comms once again. Dr. Park. His calm voice sent a chill through the room. "Rock," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "You're too late. The failsafes are already in place. The ship is on autopilot. There's nothing you can do to stop it. The mission ends here." Dwayne's blood boiled. The more Park spoke, the more Dwayne realized just how deep the deception went. This wasn't just about sabotage. It was about control. Control of the mission, control of space exploration, control of the future. "You're wrong, Park," Dwayne said, his voice firm. "You don't control this mission. We do. And we're taking it back." The sound of static filled the air before Park's voice returned, colder than before. "You think you're the hero in this story, Rock? You're nothing but a puppet. You've been manipulated every step of the way. The world will never know the truth. They'll never know the real reason you failed." Dwayne's resolve hardened. He could hear the fear in Park's voice now. He had underestimated them, thought they would give up. But Dwayne wasn't about to let that happen. "We don't stop," Dwayne repeated, this time with even more conviction. "We fight back. Together." With a single glance, he motioned to Jason and Serena. They all knew what had to be done. Dwayne and the crew made their final push. They accessed the failsafe systems and began working through the manual overrides. It wasn't easy. They were fighting against the clock, and every action had consequences. Every decision they made had to be calculated, precise. But Dwayne knew they were on the right path. They weren't just restoring systems. They were regaining their power, their autonomy. Every key they pressed, every wire they rewired, was a step closer to exposing the truth. Minutes turned into hours as they fought to regain control, but slowly, they began to make headway. The ship's autopilot system, once locked in place, started to show signs of failing. The propulsion systems began to reset, one by one. But as they neared the final step, Dr. Park's voice returned to the comms once more, this time with a hint of desperation. "You think you've won, but you haven't. This is only the beginning. You have no idea what you're really up against." Dwayne's eyes flashed with fury as he slammed his fist on the console. "We're not giving up, Park. Not now. Not ever." With one final push, Serena's fingers flew across the terminal, and suddenly, the comms crackled with static. Then, the autopilot system blinked out of existence. The crew had done it. They had regained control of the mission. The systems were back online. The failsafes were neutralized. And the ship was no longer on autopilot. The mission to Mars was back on track. The crew let out a collective breath. It wasn't over yet. But for the first time in days, they felt like they had a fighting chance. Dwayne looked around at his crew, his team, and nodded. "We've got this. Let's finish this mission. Together." As they settled back into their seats, ready to push forward, the weight of the battle ahead still loomed over them. They weren't just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for the future of space exploration itself. Dwayne knew they had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Whoever had orchestrated this conspiracy would stop at nothing to see them fail. But now, they had one thing Park didn't: control. And they were going to use it. The weight of their victory in the propulsion room felt fleeting, a brief moment of triumph against an unseen enemy. Dwayne Johnson stood at the center of the control room, the cold metal walls of the spacecraft humming around him, still echoing with the frantic pulse of the sabotage they had narrowly avoided. But while the immediate threat had been neutralized, something far deeper lurked in the shadows. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the crew worked to stabilize the ship and bring it back on course, Dwayne couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the real enemy had yet to be revealed. Dr. Park had been the face of the sabotage, but he was only the pawn in a much larger game. Someone had orchestrated this entire mission failure from the very beginning. Someone with far more influence and power than Dr. Park could ever have hoped for. The final piece of the puzzle had yet to fall into place, and Dwayne knew that once it did, everything would change. "Serena," Dwayne called out, his voice steady but full of urgency. "We need to get a full report on the mission's backup systems. Check the encrypted files, see if there's anything we missed." Serena looked up from the terminal, her brow furrowed. "Already on it, Rock. But Park's encryption is a nightmare to crack. Whoever's behind this has set up layers of defenses. I don't think it's just about sabotage anymore. This is bigger than we thought." Dwayne's jaw tightened. "I know. We've got to find the person pulling the strings. We can't afford to waste any more time." As Serena continued to work, Jason stepped forward, his voice quiet but heavy with the weight of the situation. "You think we're dealing with a conspiracy, don't you, Rock?" Dwayne nodded. "It's not just Park. He's a pawn. We're up against someone with more power, more reach. This mission was never about space exploration. It's about control. Someone wanted us to fail, and now they're watching us, waiting for us to fall apart." Jason clenched his fists. "We need to expose them. We can't let them use this mission for whatever their agenda is. We need to finish what we started." Dwayne turned to face him, his voice firm. "We will. But first, we need to figure out who's really behind all of this." Serena's fingers flew across the terminal, her eyes scanning the encrypted files. As the minutes ticked by, Dwayne could feel the tension mounting. The silence in the room was thick, each of them waiting for a breakthrough, for that final piece of information that would reveal the true mastermind behind the sabotage. Then, Serena's voice broke through the stillness. "I found something," she said, her tone sharp. "It's not much, but it's a lead. There's a series of messages in Park's personal logs. Some of them are encrypted, but I've cracked the code. There's a name here, one I didn't expect." Dwayne's pulse quickened. "Who?" Serena paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the data on the screen before meeting his gaze. "It's Adrian Hawke. He's a former high-ranking official at NASA. He was one of the key figures behind the initial funding of this mission." Dwayne's stomach sank. The name Adrian Hawke was one Dwayne knew all too well. Hawke was an influential figure in the space community, a visionary who had pushed for privatizing space missions. His ambition was well known. He had always believed that space exploration should be a tool for political and economic leverage, not just scientific discovery. But Dwayne also knew that Hawke wasn't just any influential figure. He was dangerous. A man who was willing to do whatever it took to control space, control the future. And if he was behind this conspiracy, they were up against a far more formidable opponent than they had imagined. So this whole mission, the whole failure, it's been orchestrated by Hawke? Dwayne asked, the realization hitting him hard. Serena nodded grimly. "It looks like it. Park's been working for him. Hawke's been pulling the strings from the very start. He's using this mission to gain control of space exploration, to manipulate public perception, and to secure his influence. It's all part of a much larger plan to dominate the space industry. Dwayne took a deep breath. His mind was reeling. Hawk had always been a powerful figure in the space industry, but Dwayne had never imagined he would go this far. To sabotage a mission. To put lives at risk. It was one thing to fight for power, it was another to destroy lives to get it. "We need to expose him," Dwayne said, his voice filled with a quiet fury. "We need to get this information to Earth. Let the world know who's behind this." Serena was already working on the communication system, trying to bypass the encryption and send a message back to Earth. But even as she worked, Dwayne could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. If they exposed Hawk, they would be crossing a line. They would be putting themselves in the crosshairs of a man with more power than they could imagine. "We can't let this go," Jason said, his voice heavy with resolve. "Hawk has to be stopped. The world needs to know the truth." Dwayne nodded. "We do this, we do it together. But we do it smart. We need to play this carefully." As the crew continued to work, the ship seemed to hold its breath, the ticking clock echoing in Dwayne's mind. Every action they took, every move they made, carried weight. One wrong decision and the mission, and their lives, could be over. But they couldn't back down. They couldn't let Hawk win. Serena finally managed to crack the encryption, sending a secure transmission back to Earth. "It's done," she said, her voice steady. "The message is on its way." Dwayne looked at her, relief flooding through him, but it was fleeting. They weren't out of danger yet. Hawk was a powerful man, and he would stop at nothing to protect his interests. They had just exposed the tip of the iceberg. "We've done what we can," Dwayne said, his voice firm. "Now, we finish this mission. We get to Mars, and we prove them all wrong." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Dwayne and the crew worked together, pushing through the final obstacles, getting the ship back on course. Every step was a battle against time and against the forces that had conspired to destroy them. As the spacecraft adjusted its trajectory, moving toward Mars once more, Dwayne allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. They had come so close to losing everything, so close to being manipulated into submission. But now, the mission was back on track. The truth had been exposed, and Hawk's plans had been thwarted, at least for now. As Dwayne stood in the command center, watching the stars stretch out before him, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. They had done it. They had overcome the odds, faced betrayal, and survived the conspiracy that threatened to destroy them all. But the battle wasn't over. Hawk was still out there, and Dwayne knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger fight, one that would take them all the way to Mars and beyond. The hum of the spacecraft was the only sound in the control room as Dwayne Johnson stood, staring at the dark expanse of space that stretched endlessly before him. His mind raced through the events that had brought them here, the sabotage, the betrayals, the sabotage, and now the revelation that everything they had been through was part of a larger, more dangerous conspiracy orchestrated by Adrian Hawk. "You'll never make it to Mars. The mission ends here." Those words from Dr. Park still lingered in his mind, a cruel reminder that the forces against them weren't just technological failures, they were deliberate, calculated moves to stop them. But as much as they had overcome, Dwayne knew this was far from the end. Exposing Hawk's involvement was just the beginning. He had to ask himself, what happens next? "You okay?" Serena's voice pulled him out of his thoughts, and Dwayne turned to see her standing in the doorway of the control room, her eyes searching his face. He offered her a tight smile. "Yeah. Just thinking about what we're up against now." Serena nodded, a slight frown on her face. "I get it. I've been thinking the same. We exposed Hawk, but what's going to happen when we get back to Earth? The power he holds, he's not going to go down quietly." Dwayne's eyes darkened as the gravity of their situation sank in. "We need to get to Mars first. If we don't finish this mission, the truth never gets out. And Hawk wins." Jason's voice crackled over the intercom, pulling Dwayne's attention away from Serena. "Rock, you're going to want to see this." Dwayne exchanged a quick glance with Serena before he made his way to the communications console. The tension was back in the air. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. The screen flickered, and for a moment, Dwayne thought it was just another glitch. But then, the message came through. It was from Adrian Hawk. "You've done it now," Hawk's voice echoed through the speakers. He sounded calm, composed, as though he was reading from a script. "You've exposed me. But you've made a grave mistake, Rock. You think you've won? You think the world will thank you for your little stunt? No. The world doesn't get to control space exploration. I do." Dwayne's pulse quickened. The words hit harder than he expected. The truth had been laid bare, and yet, Hawk wasn't backing down. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't even trying to justify his actions. He was threatening them, making it clear that he still held all the cards. "You think you've exposed the conspiracy," Hawk continued, "but what you don't realize is that you've only opened the door to a far larger one. There are forces far beyond your understanding. And now, you're involved. You'll never make it back. I'll make sure of it." The transmission cut out, leaving Dwayne and the crew in stunned silence. He could feel the tension in the room. Fear, anger, confusion, but most of all, a feeling of helplessness. Hawk wasn't just making threats. He was ensuring their failure, no matter what. He had the power to destroy their mission, to erase everything they'd worked for. "That son of a—" Jason muttered, slamming his fist against the console. Serena stood still, her face pale. "He's not bluffing. He'll do whatever it takes to make sure we don't succeed. We exposed him, and now we're his target." Dwayne felt the weight of her words. For the first time since he'd set foot on the spacecraft, he was beginning to realize just how deep Hawk's reach went. This wasn't just a matter of sabotaging one mission, it was about control over the future of space exploration, over the power to shape humanity's destiny. "We're not giving up," Dwayne said firmly, his voice sharp with determination. "We've come this far. We're getting to Mars. We're finishing this mission, and we're going to expose the truth to the world, no matter what it costs." The tension was palpable as Dwayne and the crew worked tirelessly to ensure the mission stayed on course. The sabotage, the threats, the revelations, none of it had broken their resolve. They still had a job to do, and they were going to finish it. But the threat of Hawk loomed large. Even with their systems stabilized and the ship back on course, Dwayne knew that the conspiracy wasn't over. They had exposed Hawk, but the battle for control of space had just begun. As the days passed, Dwayne and the crew continued to make progress toward Mars. Every time they faced a new obstacle, every time they wondered if they were on the brink of failure, Dwayne reminded them why they were there. They weren't just astronauts. They weren't just part of a mission. They were the first to challenge the system, to stand up against the forces that tried to control their future. The day they finally approached Mars, the red planet growing larger and more distinct in the viewport, Dwayne couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had made it. Against all odds, they had reached their destination. But the truth wasn't far behind. They still had to make it back to Earth. They still had to expose Hawk and everything he had planned. And they couldn't do it alone. "Almost there," Jason said, his voice filled with quiet awe as he stared out the window. "We made it." Serena, standing next to him, nodded. "We did it. Against all odds." Dwayne looked out at Mars, his chest tightening as the weight of everything they had fought for hung in the balance. "We didn't just make it here," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth." The landing on Mars was nothing short of miraculous. The crew had worked together to ensure that every step of the mission went smoothly. As they touched down on the Martian surface, the spacecraft finally came to a halt, and Dwayne couldn't help but smile. They had done it. They had made it to Mars, and they had survived against a conspiracy that had tried to tear them apart. But there was no time to celebrate. The crew quickly got to work, securing the area and setting up communication with Earth. They had one chance to send their message, one opportunity to expose the conspiracy that had almost destroyed everything. As Dwayne sat at the comms panel, his fingers hovered over the keys. The message was clear. It was time to tell the world the truth. He hit the button, and the message went out to Earth. "This is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and this is the crew of the Mars mission. We've made it. But we didn't do it alone. We uncovered a conspiracy that almost destroyed this mission, manipulated by Adrian Hawk, a former NASA official, and a shadow organization pulling the strings from Earth. We fought against sabotage, against betrayal, and against a system that wanted to control our future. We're here on Mars, and we won't let anyone erase what we've accomplished." The transmission cut off, and the room was silent for a long moment. Dwayne stood up, his heart pounding, his chest tight with the weight of the message. But in that silence, something shifted. The truth was out. They had exposed the conspiracy. They had completed the mission. They had made it. The dust had settled on Mars, the red planet now a permanent mark on the history of humanity's greatest achievements. Dwayne Johnson and his crew had stood at the forefront of a mission that was meant to unite the world, push the boundaries of space exploration, and symbolize a bright future for humanity. They had done what so many thought was impossible. They had reached Mars. And they had done it under the most unimaginable circumstances. But for Dwayne, the reality of their success felt bittersweet. As the crew set up their equipment on the Martian surface, sending the first messages back to Earth, Dwayne found himself deep in thought, looking at the horizon where Earth seemed impossibly far away. He had succeeded in exposing the truth, but what came next? What would the world think when they learned the full extent of the conspiracy? Could they trust the people who had controlled space exploration for so long? "Dwayne, you okay?" Jason's voice cut through his thoughts. Dwayne looked over to find Jason standing a few feet away, adjusting the equipment. Jason's face was drawn, tired, but there was a look of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "Yeah," Dwayne said, his voice low. "Just thinking." Jason nodded, his hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the barren landscape of Mars. "I get it. I can't believe we're actually here." "We made it," Dwayne said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But now we have to face the music. The truth is out. But there's no telling how the world's going to react." Jason turned toward Dwayne, his expression serious. "What do you think will happen?" Dwayne let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know. There's a lot of people who won't want the truth to get out. Hawk's been pulling strings for years. And now that we've exposed him, he'll stop at nothing to cover his tracks." Jason's jaw tightened. "You think he'll come after us?" Dwayne looked at him for a long moment. "He's already come after us. But we won this round. We made it to Mars, and we've got the proof to back it up. Hawk won't stop, but neither will we." The first few days on Mars were filled with the routine work of setting up the mission's equipment, collecting data, and ensuring that everything was running smoothly. But the excitement of their success was tempered by the constant awareness that they weren't just astronauts anymore. They were the ones who had exposed a conspiracy that could change the future of space exploration. Every transmission to Earth carried with it the weight of what they had uncovered. Every message from the crew was met with a mixture of excitement, disbelief, and growing concern. Dwayne knew that the next phase of the mission was about more than just exploration. It was about exposing the people behind the sabotage, making sure the truth reached the public, and ensuring that the mission's integrity was preserved. "We've got to stay focused," Dwayne told the crew as they gathered in the control room. "We're not done here. We've got work to do. We've got to finish what we started, and make sure the world sees what Hawk and his people have been hiding." Serena, who had been quietly working on the communication systems, looked up. "I've been analyzing the transmissions from Earth. The higher-ups, those with the power to make decisions, they're not happy. They're scared. Hawk's people have connections everywhere. They're trying to sweep this under the rug, but we can't let them." Dwayne's eyes narrowed. "I expected that. We've got to make sure the truth sticks. We can't let them silence us." Jason added, his voice thick with frustration, "If we're not careful, they'll turn the narrative against us. They'll say we're the ones who failed the mission, not the ones who exposed it." Dwayne stood tall, his presence commanding, as he looked at his crew. "We're not going to let them control the story. We're going to make sure the truth gets out. We've come this far. And no matter what happens, we're going to finish this mission." As the crew prepared to send more detailed transmissions back to Earth, Dwayne's mind began to race again. Every move they made from here on out was critical. The world had seen their success in reaching Mars. But the conspiracy, the world didn't know the half of it. And as they worked to ensure that their discoveries were documented and shared, Dwayne knew that exposing the conspiracy was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. Hours passed, and the crew continued to work, each of them focused on their tasks. But even as they worked, the weight of their mission was starting to sink in. What they had accomplished was nothing short of extraordinary. But the cost. The cost was far greater than any of them had anticipated. They weren't just fighting for the future of space exploration, they were fighting for control of the narrative, for the right to shape the future without being manipulated by the powerful forces who had tried to stop them. At some point, as they completed their final tests and set the ship's course for Earth, Dwayne looked out at the Martian horizon again. The view was breathtaking. The emptiness of space had always seemed so far away, but now, standing on the surface of Mars, Dwayne knew that everything had changed. They had proven that humanity could reach beyond its limits, but they had also uncovered the darker side of the forces that controlled the future. "Rock," Jason said, pulling him out of his thoughts, "we're ready to go back. Earth is waiting for us." Dwayne nodded, the weight of their success still pressing down on him. "Let's go home." The journey back to Earth was long, and the crew spent the time preparing for the inevitable fallout. They had exposed the conspiracy, but now they had to face the consequences. How would the world respond to the truth? How would the government, the corporations, and the people involved in the conspiracy react? As the spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere, Dwayne couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. They had completed the mission, but the war for control over the future of space was far from over. And while they had won this battle, there would be more to come. As they landed safely back on Earth, Dwayne was met with a wave of media attention. The world was eager to hear their story, to know how they had made it to Mars, and how they had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened to tear it all down. But as the cameras flashed and the questions came in rapid fire, Dwayne's mind stayed focused on the larger picture. The mission had been a success, yes, but the battle for truth, for transparency, for control, was only just beginning. Standing on the steps of the spacecraft, with the world watching, Dwayne looked out over the sea of reporters, officials, and scientists. The fight wasn't over. And the truth had only just begun to take root. "We did it," Dwayne said into the microphone, his voice steady and unwavering. "We made it to Mars. And we exposed the truth. Now, it's up to all of us to make sure the future of space exploration is built on honesty, integrity, and the courage to challenge the powers that be. This is just the beginning." And with that, Dwayne Johnson knew that their mission had achieved something far more powerful than reaching Mars. They had taken control of their own future, and no one could take that away from them.